Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. Welcome to Plurilock's webinar on adapting to the latest cybersecurity threats in the industrial control and operational technology space. We're going to be covering just a little bit about integrating continuous security testing into the Purdue Model. I am Christian Scott. I am our cybersecurity practice lead here at Plurilock, most specifically covering our offensive cybersecurity services. Here at Plurilock, we are a world-class cybersecurity elite forces team that partners with organizations to deliver cybersecurity solutions and services that helps protect them against the world's most sophisticated malicious actors and threats. Before I jump in here, what I want to do is I want to provide a little bit more context background about myself, as well as set some house rules. So in regards to this webinar, we have right now the questions should be open. And with the questions, I certainly want to encourage folks that as we go through the webinar to submit any questions that you have. And towards the end of the webinar, I'll cover as many questions as I possibly can and provide folks as much insight as possible. That being noted, I'm going to switch to our next slide. And I'm going to talk a little bit about myself and my background. So first and foremost, I come with about 20 years of experience in both technology and cybersecurity, owning and operating technology and cybersecurity programs for a lot of Fortune 1000 organizations, cloud service providers, healthcare institutions. And over my career, I've matriculated from software development, systems engineering, cybersecurity program management, and offensive cybersecurity. I am known by many as an elite white hat ethical hacker, and I have overseen thousands of penetration testing, social engineering, red teaming, purple teaming, and cybersecurity risk assessment engagements. I am a bit of a cybersecurity nerd in my free time. I do like to do a lot of research and education, including providing numerous contributions to the cybersecurity community through things like Legion, which is a semi-automated pen testing framework that's featured and packaged in Kali Linux. As well as providing insight into hundreds of folks who are trying to break into cybersecurity and learn more about cybersecurity and upskill in cybersecurity through my educational nonprofit, Cyber Judo. Today here at Plurilock, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the OT cybersecurity threat landscape, some of the key drivers behind the most common intrusions that are occurring in the industry today. We're also going to talk a little bit about the Purdue Model, some of the challenges that come alongside the Purdue Model, as well as providing very specific tactical tips on improving your organization's security posture, especially from an operational technology perspective. That being said, because much of my background is in offensive cybersecurity, much of what I'm going to talk about is through that specific lens. And I think that that type of lens is really, really helpful in a different type of perspective than maybe most folks get exposed to. Another great thing about this webinar and session is that we also are going to be covering some very specific tools that I personally recommend, but also at the end of the day, I always highly recommend that if you're using any free and open source tools, that you check them for any type of bugs and all that kind of stuff, and make sure that you practice good change management control as you're deploying new tools and technologies throughout your organization. All the things that we're about to talk about are free and open source. So there is nothing in here where it's like, hey, you need to go and spend X amount of dollars on this, that, and the other thing. These are supposed to be very novel, practical tips and technologies that people could start implementing today within their enterprise. So that being said, the current operational technology threat landscape, I don't think there's much to say in regards to it being novel, that there is a increase in significant attacks by adversaries of greater sophistication, including state actors, right, on industrial control systems and operational technology systems throughout a lot of the different verticals and spaces of utility providers, critical manufacturers, so on and so forth, right? Fortinet actually specifically just did a study and a set of surveys, and what they found was that nearly 1/3 of their respondents had 6 or more security intrusions, which is approximately an 11% increase over last year, right? What that means is that malicious actors are continuing to not just focus on regular IT security vulnerabilities and weaknesses and exploiting them, but also moving into operational technology systems, because beyond things like a conventional data breach that you might have with a IT environment, with operational technology systems, it can be really impactful and disruptive to not just supply chains, but it can be disruptive to communities and governments and municipal groups and all that type of stuff, right? And, given, again, increased focus from state actors on operational technology systems, it kind of makes sense that we're seeing this trend and pattern grow out. Interestingly enough, while this year, when we take a look at all the intrusions, every type of intrusion that really exists in the Fortinet report has increased, with the exception of new malware, right? But if we just kind of look at the lens a little bit further out, over the last 3 years, in the last 3 years, we've seen more operational technology specific malware that's been disclosed than even the entire decade previous to that, as you can kind of see in this timeline that we have down below. And obviously, we have a lot of different governmental agencies and groups like CISA that continue to advise on organizations improving their security posture when it comes to the operational technology space. And as you can see, we have a breakdown from Microsoft here in their latest digital defense report on what are the major vulnerabilities and weaknesses that malicious actors are exploiting, and also across what types of systems and domains. That being said, what are the key drivers behind these operational technology intrusions? If we go and take a look at another report, really using corroborating evidence and data and statistics, the SANS report that just came out recently in the last couple months on the state of industrial control and operational technology cybersecurity found that approximately 45% of respondents in their survey indicated that there was a compromise in IT systems, right? And that allowed operational technology or malicious actors to move into operational technology environments. So the initial attack vector or compromise was through IT, right? And then it moving into the operational technology systems and manufacturing systems and industrial control systems. Now, one of the things I would note about this particular graph, bar graph on the side here, is that obviously if we go to add up all these percentages, right, it's greater than 100. And the reason being is that respondents were provided the opportunity of responding to or selecting multiple options in their response. So there's a degree of overlap in these surveys that also occurs. So for example, the compromise of IT system leading to operational technology systems could also be through external remote services, right? Which is the second item for the most common initial attack vector, right? But really, if we look through that lens, the top three being, compromise through our regular IT systems into operational technology systems, compromise through some type of remote services. We're going to talk about remote monitoring and management tools here in just a couple of moments, and then internet accessible devices and systems, right? If we just use the other lens of when operational technology firms, what they're doing about monitoring their systems, in our pie graph here, we can see that approximately 52% of firms and respondents said that they had limited network monitoring capabilities, right? And then when you add to that, the 12% of firms that responded that they have no network monitoring whatsoever, and then another 10% that are just generally unsure, that leaves us with almost 75%, right, of folks are either having no monitoring in place, right, of their industrial control or operational technology environment, or it's very, very limited, right, and that's an area of focus for them. And, again, taking these two different data sources and lining them up together, that would corroborate the pattern of why we're also seeing malicious actors compromise things like internet accessible devices and systems, right? And so, we're all kind of familiar with, yes, we need to be, having, asset tracking and management systems, for our operational technology environment and devices and all that. But how can we monitor that better, right? Without significantly increasing our budget or complexity of our environment. So many of you may be aware or may not be aware of the Purdue Model. right? Which is, a fairly older and standard kind of model that's, in the operational technology space, right? And really what it does is it kind of, demarcates in layers 6 major domains between, your IT environment and your OT environment across different layers of the enterprise, a DMZ zone, your operational control environment, a general control environment, processes, and your sensors and your actuators, right? And as we take a look at malicious actors and the common ways in which they're gaining access to a lot of industrial control systems, operational technology environments. What we see with kind of the challenges with the Purdue model is that, well, air gapping no longer really works as kind of anticipated. And that makes sense, given the rise of, the Internet of Things and cloud adoption and being able to manage devices and systems better at scale, but at the same time, too, as most of us are aware in this space, industrial control systems, SCADA systems, they're not necessarily built in mind with continuously evolving, changing, and adapting and being updated. They're built to be consistent, right? And they're long lasting, right? So rather than deploying, an IT system, conventionally might exist for a year to 3 years, an operational technology system might have to exist 5, 10, 15 years, right? Especially because of the cost of a lot of, this type of equipment that might be involved in, complex, manufacturing processes and all that kind of stuff, right? So what that means is that inherently we're working with older technologies, which means that there's, insecure protocols, there's not modern security features there. The hardware may not be powerful enough to be, updated to run, modern encryption algorithms and support them and all that type of stuff. So that makes a lot of sense, even though someone might be interfacing in an older industrial control system with like a cloud gateway, right, to manage that system, right? And then lastly, into one of the 3 main indicators or initial points of attack for organizations is malicious actors leveraging remote monitoring and management tools to gain access to industrial control systems, operational technology environments through these, IT armament tools. And there's a lot out there, certain that, folks, are familiar with things like TeamViewer, Connect Voice Screen Connect, so on and so forth, right? And they're leveraged by IT departments to support, IT environments and OT environments and, be able to maintain those environments. And malicious actors are keen that if they want to gain a foothold into an organization and be under the radar, be evasive, right? And laterally move about, throughout the organization and its systems and environments, gaining as much access as possible, leveraging the same tools as the IT department behooves them to be evasive, right? Because those tools are frequently not picked up out of the box by your conventional endpoint detection and response software or your extended detection and response systems or your security information management system, unless you take the time to very thoroughly curate what are the IT remote monitoring and management tools that are allowed, which ones are disallowed in your environment, right? And not everyone has the time to do that. And, where do you get a list like that from, right? So when we go through that lens and diving in a little bit further of, okay, malicious actors are gaining a foothold into a lot of these systems, that are, connected directly to the internet, or they're laterally moving from your IT environment into your operational technology environment. What are the conventional things that they're exploiting? I don't think anything, as we had kind of listed here, is a surprise to folks on this call of, well, you have outdated authentication protocols or processes, or it's just not configured with, any type of central authentication system, right? Like Active Directory or Intra ID, or there's insecure communications, right? A lot of these, operational technology systems, they may not support modern TLS 1.2 plus, right? They might only support, SSL 3 and things like that are relatively easy for malicious actors to now be able to sniff that traffic and crack it, right? And the same goes for also default configurations of credentials. This is a fairly pernicious and unfortunate set of vulnerabilities that exist because default configurations and conventional credentials are avoidable, right? What we discussed, the two risks above are items that are maybe not easy to get around or remediate because you're dealing with, again, an older, operational technology system that may not support, modern software. But default credentials and configurations is something that we as technologists and folks in managing these environments, we can prevent, right? And I think that goes much back to one of the largest challenges, obviously, in this space is, mapping and keeping our fingerprint or our fingers on the pulse when it comes to our IT assets and our operational technology assets across a large geographic domain in many instances, right? And then lastly, out-of-date legacy software and libraries. And again, that goes hand in hand, with the first two items in this list. And this data really comes from the Microsoft's recent digital defense report, where they were using Defender for Endpoint to kind of monitor and look at, what were the top 300 vulnerabilities, right, across a lot of the partner suppliers and firms that they were working with in the operational technology space. And as we continue forward here, we want to think in the context and have in mind always practicing a defense in depth posture, right? And having an architecture that can, in a certain way, have compensating controls that makes up for these the top three items. Really, default configurations and credentials really shouldn't exist, right? But those other three items, right? How do we implement other compensating controls, right, to protect against those types of threats, right? Now, a lot of folks are obviously aware that of various, zero trust technologies and microsegmentation technologies and all that kind of stuff. And that makes a lot of sense. And certainly that is a great conversation to have at another time, right? But that's also not something that's practically implementable, right, within a short, minute time frame. That's not necessarily something that's practical for somebody to do almost like today, right? And so one of the things that I want to do is I want to focus a little bit talking about practical tips, right? And again, from the perspective of being in the shoes of a offensive cybersecurity practitioner and someone who emulates an adversary breaking into organizations on a regular basis. So practical defensive tip number one. So, again, most folks are very much aware about having good asset management processes in place. Okay. And a lot of times they're doing that through, white box processes within the organization and using, the organization's white box tools. White box being in the system, right? You're in the organization, right? You're leveraging, the information within the organization, right, to map those assets, keep your fingers on the pulse of those assets and all that type of stuff. And that's certainly great, but always having, a cooperating mechanism and perspective to identify any potentially exposed assets or assets that maybe you're not tracking for is important. And so, one of my go-to tools and a lot of our penetration testing engagements is a tool called Camera, which is a free and open source reconnaissance tool for discovering and assessing exposed Internet of Things, industrial control systems, and operational technology systems. And it leverages a lot of, technologies that, maybe some of you folks are aware of, like Shodan. Now, Shodan is essentially, the equivalent of Google, right? But rather than, Google, who indexes websites and metadata that's on those websites and then provides you a mechanism to search across those websites, Shodan is like the Google for devices that are connected to the internet, right? What IP addresses, are on the internet, right? What ports do they have open? What types of services are listening on those ports? And then being able to fingerprint those services and identify any types of vulnerabilities and weaknesses, right? So that's a mechanism of passive reconnaissance, right? And then also leveraging, some other good data sets from Binary Edge and Whois XML, or Whois and XML API, so that you can quickly and easily scan through, your external IP addresses, subnets, your geography for any relevant systems that might be unintentionally exposed, right? And then this way you can quickly respond to patching up those systems or remediating those systems, through access control lists that you can deploy, or making sure that those devices, don't have default credentials, all that type of stuff, right? So that's practical defense tip number one, right? Is have a perspective on mapping your organization's external attack surface using open source intelligence gathering tools rather than just relying on your IT and operational technology asset list that's in-house. Next practical defensive tip that I always like to talk to people about is configuring your organization's security solutions to block unauthorized remote monitoring management IT tools within an organization. So CrowdStrike, in their most recent threat hunting report, one of the statistics that came out of it was that there was a staggering 70% increase in instances where they saw malicious actors abusing these remote monitoring and management tools. And as someone who comes from a background, again, of emulating an adversary, almost always when, I compromise an organization in an engagement, which, they, have authorized us to help them, emulate a hacker, almost always when I get a foothold into systems, my first tool that I go to deploy is going to be a remote monitoring and management tool. A lot of times, I'll have a go-to, maybe like ConnectWise Screen Connect or something like that. But if in my process of planning an attack on an organization as a simulated adversary, I can find through my open source intelligence gathering process what tools they like to use, like TeamViewer and all that kind of stuff in-house, then I'm going to try to use the same tools as them as much as possible. But, I would say that 90% of malicious actors out there, are not going through that level of effort yet, right? They're just going to be using your standard run-of-the-mill, IT tools to gain access to systems, to maintain persistence, and then laterally move about and perform privilege escalation, right? So the thing is that there's a lot of these tools that exist, right? So how do you kind of keep track of these? So there's a really great community project that I always like to call to people, which is Living Off the Land Remote Monitoring and Management. And what this community-driven product does is maintain a list of all these RMN tools, and as well as what URLs and IP addresses they communicate with, and what's the name of the binaries that they run as, and the services that they run as on systems and all that kind of stuff, right? And so what that allows us to do, on the defensive side of an organization is we can say to ourselves, okay, we don't use TeamViewer, we don't use ConnectWise, we don't use this, we don't use that, right? We only use, for example, let's say, any support or any desk or something like that. Okay, great. That means that all those other RMN tools you can block in your organization, right? And so what's great about the Living Off the Land Remote Monitoring Management community project is you can actually pull that list on a regular basis through an API, you can pull down CSV, JSON, or some pre-built Sigma rules, and then import it into your EDR, your XDR, your SIEM, and there are a fantastic number of articles that have been written by the CrowdStrike team, actually, on how to import this information into, CrowdStrike Falcon Complete and all that kind of stuff, right? This way, you're configuring your EDR to detect those types of potentially unwanted applications in your organization and block them and alert you about them, right? And again, this is, related to one of the top two, mechanisms and means in which, these adversaries are compromising operational technology environments. So it's incredibly important. And, there's a means and mechanism to do that in a practical way. And then the last big practical defensive tip that I like to provide to folks, and again, it is another open source tool, is called MITRE Caldera. Now, most folks, are familiar with MITRE, because they, map and track and monitor, all of, the CVEs exist out there, common vulnerability enumerations, with, software that's out of date, that might be vulnerable or exposed to this exploit or that exploit. But also, a lot of folks are familiar with MITRE because of their the MITRE attack framework. And the MITRE attack framework breaks down, the adversaries, tactics, techniques, and procedures into this easy to understand matrix of being able to track an adversary or a hacker breaking into an organization. And every step of the way, what are those tactics and techniques and procedures that are going to be used, from getting a foothold through lateral movement, persistence, privilege escalation, so on and so forth, right? That's great. It's a really, really great framework. And, for anyone who's on this call who might be familiar with the MITRE attack framework, but maybe not as familiar with the other aspects of it, there's actually a MITRE attack framework variant for industrial control systems that's specific to operational technology environments that are a bit different. But beyond that, MITRE also has this fantastic red teaming and purple teaming tool called Caldera. And what Caldera does is it allows organizations to simulate adversaries throughout all those different tactics, techniques, and procedures breaking into an environment, to an organization, right? So what we can do essentially is deploy an agent to a device or a set of devices and systems, right? And then have it run a profile that is emulating a particular advanced persistent threat or a hacker's TTPs. And then it's going to do things like, collect data off the operating system, right? Find opportunities where there's privilege escalation, right? Find areas for lateral movement across the network, and then execute on those step by step by step, as you kind of see here on this screenshot, right? Now, what's really, really awesome about MITRE Caldera in particular is there is an operational technology plugin that they have that allows organizations to be able to do that same type of simulation work, but also, again, in their industrial control systems, SCADA, and operational technology environments, right? Supporting things like BACnet, DMP3, Modbus, so on and so forth, right? So what we can do is, again, from a practical standpoint, and the resources for MITRE Caldera is very, very, very little. It's like 8 gigs of RAM, so it requires very little resources to build a MITRE Caldera server, get started with it. There's tons of excellent guides and information out there. But what organizations can then start to do, right, is simulate an adversary through the Purdue model for their organization, right? So the biggest statistically in the surveys from Fortinet and the other firms that I've quoted throughout this webinar, the biggest intrusion mechanism has been a malicious actor movement from IT systems into operational technology systems, right? And so with MITRE Caldera, we can, again, simulate that process of initial access, persistence, discovery, so on and so forth, right? And then with their operational technology plugin, right, augment that to go across the rest of the Purdue model and get in a little bit deeper, right? And so that then allows us, to, hit levels, 3, 2, and 1, particularly like exploiting, maybe vulnerable systems with BACnet that's exposed and that type of stuff, right? And that allows us with a situation like this to have a full, thorough understanding of an adversary gaining a foothold into a system over here, and then moving through all the layers of our organization where we can then identify opportunities where we can improve our security controls, practice a better defense in depth posture by implementing overlapping safeguards, right? And then seeing how deep we can continuously kind of get into our operational technology environments at the lowest levels of the Purdue model. So that being said, I hope that this session has been a very insightful and educational session for folks in regards to understanding where the threat landscape has been going in the operational technology space, as well as providing some helpful practical tips. Obviously, this isn't where it stops. These are very specific things that organizations and firms can essentially start doing today or tomorrow if they're not already. When it comes to, all the other fantastic best practices out there in talking about things like deploying zero trust networking solutions, all that kind of stuff, certainly there is a space for that. And, that sounds like probably another fantastic webinar we'll have on the horizon here. But all of the references that are in these slides also go back to reports that have all those best practices, kind of the standard best practices consistently outlined, right? So I really didn't want to have it where we would rehash that for you folks today or anything like that. Now, one of the great things about this webinar is that it is recorded, and this slide deck will be disseminated after a fact for anyone who registered to the event here. This way, you guys can take that back, go through the slides, right, and look through some of the references, look through some of the kind of the practical recommendations here, all that kind of stuff. Before we jump off, what I am going to do is I'm going to take a brief moment to take a look at any big questions or concerns that have come in here so far. Bear with me one moment. Okay, stupendous. I must have been incredibly thorough because I do not have any big questions here, even though I got a nice attendee audience. That being said, if there are any questions that anyone has after seeing this recording or going through the slide deck materials that'll get sent after the fact, please do not hesitate to reach out to us here at Plurilock with any big questions, concerns, thoughts, or if there's any cybersecurity initiatives that you need help with on the horizon. Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye now.